Hello everyone, my name is Yiqing. I'm a PhD student in Cornell Tech. Today I want to talk about my work in characterizing Twitter users who engage in adversarial interactions against political candidates. This work is in collaboration with my advisors, Naaman and Ristenpart. This work has been accepted for CHI 2020. You can find the slides, the paper, the dataset used in this paper, all on my website, which is linked below. So, why are we interested in characterizing adversarial users against political candidates? Today, Twitter is essentially an essential platform for political candidates, where they can connect to their constituents, they can express their opinions, and they can campaign for their race. Ideally, on Twitter, there are users who want to communicate with the candidate in a more productive way. They can either agree or disagree with the idea. They might have their own ideas they want to express. However, in reality, this is not often the case. There are more and more adversarial users nowadays on Twitter against political candidates. This kind of adversarial interactions often aiming at silencing the candidates. And sometimes this kind of online harassment may even drive the candidates out of their race. This kind of behavior has strong ramifications on our society and democracy. Therefore, in this work, we aim to understand and characterize adversarial users who interact with political candidates. Our work shows that 10% of the users created more than 35% of the adversarial replies. Moreover, these users exhibit different behavioral patterns than normal users, and they show a tendency to seek out conflicts. Adversarial users tend to involve in fewer supportive interactions with candidates and pay more attention to opponent candidates. These results can potentially be helpful for platform providers and moderators to understand more about what to look for and how to use limited resources in order to better provide an environment for political candidates. Previous work have been looking at characterizing adversarial users on Twitter, but not in a political context. Another line of previous work looked at adversarial interactions in political context, however, with a focus on the interactions themselves, to characterize them, to measuring them, or with a focus on the political candidates, in terms of what kind of attributes of political candidates tend to attract more adversarial interactions. Our own work in this area, also looking at US politicians in 2018, is published in ICWM SM 2020, where you can find the paper on my website. So in this talk today, we want to talk about adversarial users in political context, combining these two lines of work. We use the following framework to do this characterization analysis. First of all, we do the data collection, and then we identify adversarial interactions with automatic detection approaches. In the end, we correlate user characteristics with the amount of adversarial interactions that they contribute using a regression analysis. So let's talk about data collection. In order to study this phenomenon, we collected a dataset which we call US Midterm Election Twitter Dataset 2018. This includes 1.2 million user replies to 786 candidates running for US House of Representatives between September 17, 2018 to November 6th, which was the general election date. This records interactions from 0.4 million users with political candidates. With the scale of the data, it's impossible to manually label every single interaction in order to find the adversarial ones. Therefore, we ask for help from automatic detection tools. Here, we define adversarial interactions as behaviors on social media that intended to hurt embarrass, or humiliate a targeted individual. We use toxicity scoring from Perspective API to identify adversarial interactions. Here, toxic utterance means a rude, disrespectful, or unreasonable comment that is likely to make you leave a discussion. The detailed analysis and validation of this method can be found in our paper. With this method, now we can identify the adversarial interactions, and we can know how many users are contributing to the adversarial interactions. In fact, we find that 35% of the adversarial replies are contributed by only 10% of the users. Also, now we know the adversarial interactions contributed by each user. We would like to use a linear regression model to correlate user characteristics with the amount of adversarial interactions that they contribute, in order to better understand what are the characteristics of the adversarial users. Here, we focus on a group of users which we call moderately active users. They posted more than 3 but no more than 30 replies. They comprised 21% of all users and contributed 50% of all the replies and 52% of all the adversarial replies. So in our linear regression model, we include the 4 main groups of user characteristics. First of all is the control variable, which is the replies to candidates that has been posted by the user. And then we look at basic user features, such as number of followers, number of days on Twitter, whether this user has been verified on Twitter. These features have been used in previous work in terms of understanding abusive users on Twitter. And then we looked at the third group of features, which is specific to our work. It records the engagement in political activities of a particular user. So we looked at supportive interactions with candidates, centrality in politically engaged crowd, the user's attention to opponent candidates, and their partisanness in profile. You can find the details in our paper. In the last group, we looked at the adversarial activities by Twitter friends, which is defined by the following relationship on Twitter. Previous work have shown that one's friends' abusive behaviors might also impact that person. So, our linear regression model explains 0.231 of the variations in the dataset. Therefore, we say that the adversarial users exhibit different behavioral patterns than the other users. Here, we see a number of significant variables in this case. First of all, of course, the control variable, replies to candidates, has a positive correlation with the number of adversarial interactions the user has. Among the basic user features, only the number of followers has significant correlation with the number of adversarial interactions, which is a negative correlation. We see that the engagement in political activities are significant in terms of correlation with amount of adversarial interactions. Also, the adversarial activities by Twitter friends. Here, we focus on number of variables that we think that are representative. By that, we mean the supportive interactions a user has with candidates, their attention to opponent candidates, which has positive correlation with their amount of adversarial interactions, and whether they exhibit partisanness in their user profile. These features shows a tendency to seek out conflicts of the users. Here we measure the supportive interactions with candidates as numbers of retweets the user has and number of candidates that they follow. And we measure the attention to opponent candidates as the number of replies the user make to the opponent candidates. But what about the content of the replies? So we want to ask more questions about the content of replies, such as do adversarial users post fewer supportive replies, or are adversarial users more negative in some ways in their replies to candidates? Here, we focus on a group of users which we call highly adversarial users. These users posted more than 10 adversarial tweets. They comprise only 0.3% of all the users, but they contributed a large percent of the adversarial interactions. We compare this group of users to the highly active users, who are the users who posted more than 10 replies. Our method here is a qualitative approach, as the user group is relatively small and we want to look at a more detailed information in this analysis. So we randomly sampled 200 adversarial and 200 non-adversarial replies from each group, and we perform manual labeling on the samples. So the first group of behaviors that we look at is what we call supportive replies. For each reply, we ask the annotators whether it is supportive to candidates, whether it's supportive for the political affiliation of the candidates, or whether it is supportive for the political view or the policy of the candidate. So we found that not only the highly adversarial users have fewer supportive interactions, they have significantly fewer supportive replies for candidates themselves. We also looked at the different categories of negative replies that the highly adversarial users and the highly active users might post. We found that in the other categories, there's not much difference, while the highly adversarial users post significantly more insults, threats, criticisms on personalities, the kind of negative replies at a more personal level. So in conclusion, we found that a very small group of users contributed a relatively large amount of adversarial replies, which could potentially be the target of a more efficient moderation effort. On the other hand side, we show that adversarial users exhibit different behavioral patterns than the other users. In particular, they show a tendency to seek out conflict. With qualitative and quantitative analysis, we show that adversarial users involve in fewer supportive interactions and pay more attention to opponent candidates. If you're interested in this line of work, you can also check out our work accepted to ICWSM 2020, looking at measuring adversarial Twitter interactions against political candidates in the US midterm elections, where we show the different categories of adversarial interactions, and we show that when we rule out the amount of attention from the opponent users, the party affiliation and the gender of the candidate actually is not predictive in terms of how many adversarial interactions that they receive. You can find both papers on my website. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email. Thank you.